Thanks for the invitation. Good morning, everyone. My name is Alejandro Miranda. We prepared this paper as a collective effort with two more persons, Sara Bonfanti, my colleague, and Aurora Massa, who is not here, but she also collaborated in the elaboration of this idea. We're trying to reflect on a number of issues that are emerging in a comparative project, a relatively big ERC project in which we participate. This is a multi-sited project, ethnographic, and we also use some other techniques. We try to compare across different geographical spaces and across different groups of people. The general idea of the project is to understand how home and migration connect with each other. Home as a process, not as a single thing. Home is material, but also a processual social thing. It is a socially constructed scale. So we are trying to understand how this works in the context of migration. So the problem is how to do justice to the particularities of our cases when we have a genuine commitment towards comparison in our project. So we have different angles. Sara is focusing on Pakistani and Indian migrants in Brescia, London and Birmingham, and the Netherlands, particularly Amsterdam. Aurora Massa is focusing on Eritrean, Ethiopian and Somali people living in Rome, Stockholm and London. And myself, I'm studying Peruvian and Ecuadorians in Madrid, Milan and the Netherlands, and particularly Amsterdam. So some spaces overlap, some others don't. So we are actually trying to produce comparativity of ways of homing, ways of inhabiting the space at different levels, at private and beyond private level, and also in the context of public and semi-public spaces. So one of the first things that we are facing in this reflection on how to compare and what we are comparing is that there is a sort of intuition of what can be compared and what is not supposed to be compared. So we have certain ontological presumptions. For example, we presume that geographical space can be compared, so we can compare across these cities, and also we can compare across groups of people who come from different countries and they live in Europe. So for example, to think that one can only compare those things that are comparable is a way of fixing these processes. But we can also think that we are elaborating comparison, we are constructing comparisons across different moments in our research project. So there are two different angles here that I would like to mention. One is, in our comparison, we are focusing on different spaces in a relational way. How the domestic environment, when we go to houses to see what's going on there, and how that overlaps with public and semi-public spaces, that is a relational way of tackling this. It's not only what happens in the domestic, but in other areas like churches, markets, parks, things like that. And that relational approach is connected to our comparisons across our cases. So that, how do we shift from one to the other? We need to operationalize this shift. And that's when you come in.
It's really modern, that's great. So, perhaps so far what Alejandro was trying to convey, that the foremost challenge in the homing project where we all collaborate was the implicit comparative method it called for. So from assumption to practice, we had to find modes and elaborate models for operationalizing our aim to match and contrast the data we were producing. So what did we do? We tried to establish analogous parameters for data construction, which could then render our findings somehow, as case-specific as they were, anyway consistent. Such an operationalization, so that was making social-cultural facts possibly comparable, applied in fact to three different facets of our empirical work in the field. So first of all, we developed guidelines for the narrative work we were conducting with research participants, and that meant developing guidelines for opening interviews and life histories as well. Then we sort of tailored a scaffolding to retrieve the socio-demographic profiles of all our interviews. And last, we focused on our ethnographic observations on both private homes and semi-public spaces, such as worship places, markets, or parks and restaurants, so to guarantee a certain degree of accessibility and replicability also, and provide parallel settings for our ethnographic research and field notes to share. So all these strategies were somehow minor, but they were also effective to induce a comparative approach. And at the same time, they were pliable to be reshaped in due course as our fieldworks and collective sharing proceeded. So I'll try now to start focusing on an interest which was common to us all after our first bout of fieldwork, and that is how senses, and in particular food smells, were involved in the process of making and unmaking boundaries within and between social groups across post-migrant urban settings. So we're going to turn now to a little bit of ethnographic discussion, and I've got a few sort of vignettes from my own case, from Aurora case, and from Alejandro's ones. So if the preparation and consumption of food, cooking and eating are a feast for all senses, in this part of the presentation, we look at the ways of homing, of making home, implemented by those who migrate and relocate, considering the most elusive and yet poignant of food properties, that is, aromas. Aromas can evoke one sense of home and homeland, and at the same time they might prevent people from feeling at home in no places of settlement. Culinary scents are a potent elicitor of home memories, providing emigrants with a sensory reproduction of their social belonging. Likewise, food whiffs can erect boundaries of exclusion from a community of taste, and also provide sort of bodily aversion against fooling others. So, taking from my own case studies, as for South Asian minorities in the West, curry is the misty icon of Oriental cultural taste. Now, we do all know that in post-colonial times, South Asian cookery has somehow transformed urban foodscapes worldwide. That's, for example, the case of the Balti restaurants in the Midlands in Birmingham, where I did part of my research, whose tandoori dishes baked in a metal pan with no ghee, no clarified butter, appealed to Western healthy eating trends since the 80s. Indeed, the very term curry is a British adaptation of the Tamil curry. So it is still known, although, as garam masala in the subcontinent. And garam masala literally means warm seasoning. So while in Britain, going for a curry is a common weekend dining out, there is no other European country, regardless the size of their South Asian population, which has developed similar patterns of domestication of an alien taste. So in the case of Indo-Pakistani immigrants in Italy, most of them have retained the habit to procure Hindustani food from local stores and to prepare at home their meals. Between the need to comply with religious dietary prescriptions and the desire to restore one's home taste in the plate. With the rise of second generations, personal taste has shifted little. So Italian food is celebrated and enjoyed by youth, yet comfort food, which metaphorically warms one's up, is still garam masala. Paradoxically, if mushrooming Indian restaurants in northern Italy do cater for middle-class cosmopolitan native, curry whiffs often hinder the integration and conviviality of South Asian communities in Italian cities. Youngsters in school and other peer-to-peer settings often report bullying because of their embodied food stench. Adaptively, many Indian immigrant women resort to frying their food with closed kitchen windows, so to prevent intolerant neighbors' complaint. As their kids grow up, most get obsessed with recurrent shampooing, trying to wash out their ethnic odor of difference. So I'm taking now a case from Aurora's vignette. Aurora writes, the berber, the Ethiopian-Eritrean spice mix, plays a fundamental role in the homing process of Eritrean migrants in Europe. Both in Rome and Stockholm, she collected a number of strategies people use not to smell like berber, such as boiling cinnamon, lighting up air conditioner, or opening windows while cooking. Again, washing clothes, air, or even curtains and blankets after having cooked, or avoiding cooking as much as possible. These strategies can be put in relation with the quality of cleanliness, which internationalistic rhetoric Eritreans attribute to themselves. So with the effort to become a decent presence. So the efforts to neutralize Berber smell pertain to the way Eritreans represent themselves, but are strongly influenced by the attitude of some receiving societies. That's the case of Italy, for example. To use the words of a young Eritrean woman she interviewed, "I do not like the smell of Berber on me. In the subway in Rome, white Italians already look at you badly because niggers sit on our seats. Imagine what happens if you stink." So interestingly, Berber smell is often discovered in diasporic setting only, where it stands out from local food smells. So outdoor management sheds light on the interlacement between public and private space.
Okay, so in trying to make ourselves at home, we manage, use, and react to smell. Everyone knows that smells are particularly powerful memory triggers, but now, how does it happen in practice? Maria is an Ecuadorian woman living in the Netherlands. She currently works with handicapped people and told me how much her current work reminds her of her father, who she thinks may have a sort of autism because he finds it very difficult to relate to other people. But Maria's father likes plants very much. She says, "In our terrace in Guayaquil, we had many plants, and my father used to talk to those plants and take care of them. And we had lemongrass for making iced tea. The smell of that tea takes me back to my house and also reminds me of my father. I look for the tea here in the Netherlands, but it is not easy to find it. And when I go to Guayaquil, I always bring some. I drink it here all the time, especially at work." Maria uses the smell and taste of lemongrass to establish connections between here and there, although some people try to avoid such connections. Madrid is a space in which Peruvians, for instance, avoid certain types of traditional food, despite being available in local stores. There is a type of fermented potato called tocosh that is widely used in the Andes because it has healing properties, but its pungent smell is tolerated by consumers in the Andes, but it's a quite alien smell. It's not a common smell in Spain, and it can be embarrassing to smell like that, so people avoid it. And some South Americans have also told me that they have to adapt to different schedules to produce smell. So for example, Amanda, she lives in a monolocale in Milan with her husband and daughter, and they are used to having hearty, hot breakfast. One morning she was making panini con cotoletta, and she heard that somebody was just running up and down in the corridor close to her door. It was the doorkeeper saying, "Que puzza, que puzza." And then she opened the door and asked, "What's going on?" And the man said that he thought that something was burning. So at first, Amanda explained to me that she perceives that people in her building don't respect her privacy. But then later on in the conversation, she told me that the cooking smells in her condominium are mostly noticeable from lunchtime onwards. So cooking hot or fried food in the morning is rather unusual. What is interesting is that Amanda later on confessed that over the years she has unintentionally adapted to the schedules of the majority in the context where she lives. So these brief vignettes show different things. One of them is that cooking smells can be avoided or used to evoke home or to make oneself at home. And the other one is that one can think about homemaking as an accomplishment that is calibrated through the senses. So how do we wrap this up? There are a series of points that we want to use to conclude this. The first one is that we are comparing comparisons. That is, we are comparing what people think about the places of origin and the places of arrival. There are several places actually, there's a whole trajectory, so they compare across these places all the time in our conversations, when we hang out, when we go and do things together. Those comparisons, we take those comparisons and we compare them. So it's the comparison of the comparison. how do we do this? It's a challenge, an ongoing thing, and we're trying to find ways to take advantage of these stands. The other point that I wanted to mention is that we are trying to conduct comparisons while we conduct fieldwork, which is different than comparing after having conducted fieldwork. This is a point that Daniel Miller wrote in a paper last year on one of his ERC projects. And one of the immediate consequences of comparing during our fieldwork is that we influence each other's choices. So, for example, I was conducting fieldwork in Madrid with another colleague in restaurants, in Ecuadorian restaurants. And at first, Sara didn't think or consider to visit restaurants in London, Indian or Pakistani restaurants. But as we are doing this work, and we are trying to understand what's going on across different places, across different communities, now Sara is going to look for restaurants in London. So we have a sort of real-time comparison while we conduct fieldwork in the space. We are two people conducting fieldwork, not always, but we sometimes do. So we have a sort of real-time comparison, and then we have comparison across different times. And now Sara is going to London, and when I was in Madrid, so we have also different temporalities and scales of comparison.
Okay. So I'm really concluding and wrapping up. So what have we been comparing so far? In this presentation only we have selected smells particularly to discuss the construction of symbolic boundaries among places and belongings. So we tried to convey the idea that food smells may reveal how one feels at home and make oneself at home, but also how food smells can be turned into instruments for alienation or discrimination. So smelling in a way passive and active, I mean, as a passive and active verbal voice, is a good example of how the public and the private became interlaced. Since we also theorized homemaking as a continuing quest for a praise of retrieval, our research intended to compare different empirical evidence, highlighting the ethical and political implications of our statement. So we do wonder through our comparison to what extent can homes, their precariousness or lack of it, host people's vulnerabilities or even become a site for resistance and agency. We also realize that in deciding to conduct certain comparisons, we are leaving some blind spots. For example, sex at home is one of those blind spots, a topic we have ignored so far. There is also another issue in the investigation as it was said from the beginning. So the issue of frontiers between the countries of origin of most of our informants. Each one of us has a group of reference who comes from a country that shares borders with the other group of reference. That is Eritrea and Ethiopia, Pakistan and India, and Ecuador and Peru. So through our comparisons, we are producing certain types of visibility and ignoring other facets that remain out of the spotlight. We do believe that making comparison is a feature of all ethnographic research anyway. Comparison is a cognitive device for knowledge production, but it is also an analytical tool for social sciences. So in our specific research, being as comparative as possible, meant to be able to share meaningfully the singularity of our case studies, identifying patterns or recurrences or even exceptionalities, and eventually seeing through a sort of looking glass connections and disconnections that would otherwise remain invisible. So thank you so much everyone for listening.